Hi, welcome to the Proud to be LBUSD Student Takeover podcast. My name is Shelby Green. I go to Millikan High School, and I work as an intern for Marketing Media Services.
And my name is Ethan Dodgen. I'm a senior at Renaissance High School for the Arts, and I'm also a MMS intern. To start off, Shelby, we both go to different schools, obviously. I go to Renaissance, you go to Millikan, and they're very different schools. What are some areas that you see equity implement on your campus?
Yeah, so coming from a standpoint of we have a very diverse campus and like a lot of kids, I'd say a little under 4,000, and about 2/3 of those are people of color, and I think roughly 45% being of Hispanic, Latinx ethnicity. So there are certainly areas where equity is like extremely important on our campus with this diverse range. And so a couple areas that I definitely notice it are when our school, we celebrate Pride Month. We celebrate Black History Month this year specifically. We did a very enriching assembly where the whole school, we went to the auditorium. It was run by Black students. We brought in these amazing guest speakers and, gave the school an opportunity to learn about the history of Black culture and just to understand more about it. And we did, for our announcements, it was a chain of, facts about Black History Month and just highlighting these Black voices and giving those opportunities. And other things like mental health awareness and Women's History Month, being open and celebrating those at our school specifically. I definitely see that as a way that they implement equity and make everyone feel, acknowledged and welcomed.
For sure. Yeah, going back to what you said about the assembly, I really think that's a great thing to do. And I think every school should be able to have, those conversations about equity and, diversity.
Yeah. So specifically for Millikan, I'm not sure exactly what happens at Renaissance with this, but another thing that I think is extremely important in an equity standpoint, and I can really appreciate this about the district and Millikan specifically, is for our AP test fees. Usually they run $95 to $100, but the school will cover the majority of that and leave students only having to pay $5 of it. And so that is such, an important thing to have where it creates like this widespread availability for us to take the test. And these students, that might not be able to afford the AP tests would have just taken this, super great class that can open opportunities in college. And if they're not able to pay for the test, it just closes them off from other kids. And so I think paying for that is great. And we host SATs at our school. So like those with transportation issues, they don't have to worry about that as much, because they give it at Millikan. And so I think especially I can appreciate that at Millikan. I don't know, the situations at Renaissance surrounding that.
Yeah, We do have AP tests, obviously, and I believe SATs as well. And I think it's the same. It's same at Renaissance as well. That they do cover that fee. But I've not taken any AP tests or that, so I'm not sure exactly how that works. But I believe it's the same.
Yeah, and I can just like you were saying about how important that is to have those discussions of equity and like even instill that in the school itself is really great. And I'm excited to know that they do that at Renaissance too.
For sure.
And a last thing that I wanted to note, this is a possible area I see improvement, and I'm guessing this is district-wide. So there are a lot of, like you had mentioned, they have AP classes at Renaissance and the same at Millikan. They have like a wide variety of different ones, which is great for students to get opportunities. But I do see a lack of trades classes in the district. Like there is no opportunity for a wood shop, for ceramics, mechanics, auto shop. And that takes away, these experiences for people who necessarily don't want to go to college. And it's also placing saying that those jobs are less important when they're not, because, we need those people and those are like great ways to make a living. And so especially not having those classes creates like this disadvantage and inequity for people who want to work in those sectors and who are opting out of college. And so how is that at your school? Like, do you see a lack of those classes?
I do in a way, yes. I mean, I go to art school, Renaissance, obviously. My interest is in stage crew, so I, do stage crew and work shows behind the scenes. And we obviously have stage crew and we have the different arts. But I think we have those, and I think it'd be nice to maybe see more of those classes and, different aspects.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and especially with Renaissance and the art school, it's nice that even that sector is being recognized.
Yes.
So I can see, an improvement there.
For sure.
Specifically touching on the pandemic response, and I know this is something we can both relate to because
Yeah, definitely.
it was a global thing, you know?
Globally.
And district-wide even, I wanted to recognize, I think, the way that our district handled responding to the pandemic. I mean, obviously, we had a rough start for everyone.
Yes.
That March was crazy. But for Millikan, we had a survey to fill out. We could fill out application for a hotspot and for a Chromebook. And immediately within that week, you can go pick it up. And that was super important for, underprivileged kids and just everyone who, maybe the Wi-Fi at home is not working, or you don't have a computer, your computer breaks down, you share a family computer, you just don't have any resources. And so the availability of, all the Chromebooks, and even for the people who were able to come back to use those in school, it created, such like a unifying experience. Like we're all able to go to school, like no matter the hard times, like it was nice to know that the district is accommodating us. And so, like that specifically at Millikan, that was how it worked. But I'd love to see how, that worked at Renaissance.
Yeah, I do believe we had the same. I'm not sure about the hotspots, but I know that the Chromebooks for sure, kids were able to, without Chromebooks to bring home for online school. And I think it really went smoothly. I think obviously it's good to have those resources, for students who are not able to have computers or, like you mentioned earlier. But yeah, I believe it was the same system.
Yeah, and that's great, I think. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely expanded the equity in the district. So I'm going to move on to question 2. I'll ask you, Ethan. So how does your school's curriculum organization impact the culture and the inclusion on your campus?
I think my campus is it's a small campus, obviously, bigger, smaller than Millikan. Around, I don't even know the number. I'm gonna say like 400. I don't even know. But we're a small campus, and I think just that I know a lot of people at my school. Like I know a lot of kids, and it's that community aspect I think is really nice because I can I know a lot of kids, and I know my teachers on a personal level. I feel like, and I think that's something you don't get at a bigger school, obviously, right?
Yeah. So exactly like what you were saying. How just like to mention that your school, especially like when you went to your school, you applied. Your school is more of a pathway school in itself because. Also, I'd like to hear more about like what exactly you go to your school for. But
Definitely.
So Millikan, I can recognize there's pathways basically within the school. So you go to Millikan and you choose your pathway according to that. And so there's about 6, not including the new editions of Laureate.
Okay.
But there's, obviously there are specific pathways. Like we have arts, we have social justice, we have, graphic design and business. But I can recognize there's slightly a disconnect between, these pathways and like how you were saying how, even though it's a small school, you feel like you have a personal connection with your teachers and everyone on a very personal level. And so I think we can kind of see similarities within the pathways, but I do want to recognize that, I would appreciate more collaboration between our pathways because it is harder at a bigger school, like what was that, like 10, 100 times how many kids you have,
exactly.
which is insane.
Yeah.
But I think that's important how you were saying, like, to know them on a personal level really enriches your learning. And so, especially for Millikan, I would like to see, between, let's say, Peace and Quest, they're learning very different things, and that's good because you choose, what you want to learn. And specialized learning can accelerate, your personal student career goals, and that's great. But recognizing that there's, like, is that disconnect? And if someone in Quest wants to also learn about social justice, they totally should be able to. And collaborate with students working on other things because hearing different perspectives from the kids learning different things would be like so educational and helpful, just, formulating your well-rounded being. And I can, see that that's happening at Renaissance, and that's great. So specifically, I mentioned what my pathways were for, but about Renaissance, like how can you see, what specifically would someone going to Renaissance come for? And then, like, how does that work within, since I know you're implementing pathways soon, but especially when you started at Renaissance, how is it, like, what's the relationship between students working on different things?
So I, like I said earlier, Renaissance is very, very inclusive, and I think we we pride ourselves in that in a way, right? And we all come. So at the end of the year, we have a big musical. We usually have a musical, and we have a spring musical, and a fall musical, obviously. And what I love about Renaissance is just the collaboration. Like at the end, all the different all the different arts come together and to that one big, produce this amazing show. And like you mentioned earlier, we're starting to implement pathways. So we're going to have a musical theater pathway, so it involves the arts, obviously. A film pathway, which is new this year. We did have a film pathway originally, but budgeting it got cut, I think. So we will have pathways, and I think pathways will help students be able to be more connected to the art, right? So like I can Renaissance for stage crew, right? So that's what I want to go into after I graduate. I want to be a sound technician. So like I think pathways can help students like stay on a certain path, right? That's the goal, right? To like be able to graduate and be able to go into your career.
Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong, but when you start in the pathway system hadn't been implemented yet, but even as you see it starting to come up, you work with kids who want to do film.
Yes.
Since you're more of stage crew, you also work with kids who are in fashion. So how does that like contribute to your experience? I would guess that that's helpful, to hear all these other perspectives. And do you work with them a lot?
So like I mentioned, the musicals, we obviously all collaborate. Costume design, makes our costume stuff, and they're all handmade, obviously. And just that collaboration is really amazing. I'm glad that we have that collaboration with the different arts to be able to produce this, show and these musicals and stuff, and the events on campus as well.
Yeah, and especially hearing about that, makes me think that that's going to give these kids a great foundation for working with other people who, necessarily don't have the same focus. Because in a true workplace, everyone let's say you're working at a company, is going to have a different focus. And so like fostering that collaboration between people who aren't necessarily working on the exact same thing is going to be so helpful, giving these kids like true work-based learning without actually going and working somewhere. And so I really appreciate, hearing that about Renaissance. That's great. And you can see, benefits of having a smaller school. Whereas I can definitely appreciate, the specialized pathways at Millikan. And I think going into Peace or Compass gives you like a deep understanding of social justice. And it can certainly like take you from a level where you didn't really know anything to being super prepared for learning more about that sector or the job in that sector. But I would definitely appreciate, like more like Renaissance, how it could just be
interconnected in a way, right?
Yeah, more interconnected and just collaboration between people who might not be working on the same thing. So I definitely can, see the differences, but also how it can be similar about the specialized learning at our different schools and how, that can contribute to different things.
Definitely, for sure.
Yeah.
At Millikan, do you see like the collaboration between the different pathways, or is it not as collaborative?
Well, we do, student unity it's not much of a problem at Millikan. I feel like, in our school spirit, we're very united. But like you were saying, like how you guys all come together for the musical, I guess like as a school-wide thing, that's not something that I can definitely see. And it would be harder because Millikan is a bigger school.
Yeah, obviously.
But it would be nice, to see something like that. And this isn't to say that, oh my gosh, I feel like I don't know anyone in the other SLCs, small learning communities. But it could be nicer to get an understanding of, what the business students are working on compared to like being in Quest. Like I have a very like tunnel vision kind of idea of what's going on. And so that's great. And just noting like the diversity in our schools with gender and ethnicity, I feel like I am proud to say that, most of our pathways have a very even distribution of students and most of them are very diverse. Like especially MIT, MBA, Peace, Compass, I see like a wide variety of people. And I can recognize, there is with Quest more of a disproportionate amount of white students than, the other pathways being more diverse and integrated. And so that's something I think, should be worked on.
Definitely.
And especially with a bigger school, things are going to change. But that could be traced down to, a foundational level of like coming from certain middle schools, like what schools are being funneled directly into Quest, and can we broaden that? Because even, like Quest being so focused on academics, you need all the academic perspective. And so I'd like to hear more about like Renaissance, how, you'd mentioned that you have a very diverse campus, but how does that affect like how you guys work together?
It doesn't seem like it affect a lot. I think I work well with other students, obviously, and I think, at least in my opinion, I don't see a disconnect there at all. I think, we're all, like I said, we're a small school, and I think we all just, get along really well. I mean, obviously, there's some discipline, obviously, but I think in the end, we all, collaborate, and I think that's really amazing.
Yeah, that's nice to hear, especially since you come from a small school where it could be like cliquey and whatever, but you
exactly.
seem to know that all of your students, regardless of, academic like specialization and, gender ethnicity, seem to be super interconnected. And so that's great to hear, about a small school.
For sure. And at the bigger school, obviously, like, would you say your interconnectedness is, that the academic and the,
Yeah, I would agree. We have pretty good interconnectedness. There are some points that we should work on, but so maybe move on to question 3.
Awesome. Initially, our schools, we both have active student leadership. I'm in ASB at Renaissance, and are you in any leadership at your school?
Not currently, but I can definitely see, I have an understanding of the leadership. So, yeah.
Awesome.
About
so like the importance of diversity in student leadership and how that correlates.
Yeah, so about what the importance is about student leadership and like how that's displayed in our campus. I think generally it's extremely important to have diversity in leadership because you want to see yourself represented, and that contributes to like so many more subtle things, feeling welcome at your school, feeling understood, feeling acknowledged. And how I definitely can see that implemented, like coming from a standpoint where I am in, certain clubs, but also just have an awareness of others. We have Millikan BSU, Black Student Union, and so there's a lot of leadership there. There's Female Leadership Academy, and that specifically spotlights like the voices of women and puts them in positions of power at the school to make changes, and just makes it more equitable, amplifying these voices of the females and giving them like these positions of power now and getting them used to, like making decisions, and whereas that can totally help them in future careers. And so I think that definitely contributes to like how diverse our student leadership is on campus. Like I can see definitely more women being active. And going back to what I said about Black Student Union, definitely I can tell that is amplifying the voices of our person of color students, especially it's run by Black student leaders. And so giving their perspective to the entire school is amazing. And they encourage, non-Black students to join and to listen to what they have to say. And so that spreads cultural awareness, and it teaches, the non-Black students how to be accommodating to them, and, how that respect, and to dismantle their own privilege, be an ally, and so that in itself like pushes up all this diversity in the leadership, and at the same time lets the non-leaders, learn how to respect everyone in a leadership position and dismantle prejudice and things like that. And we've also seen in a rising club called Advocates for Equity, which is just promoting student discussion of equity. And so even these things at like a small level can contribute to, our ASB leaders, our just like the demographics of who is in control of the school and how the students react to those people being in control. And so especially those examples being from Millikan, I would love to hear especially how you said you were an ASB, what do you see in your student leadership that demonstrates equity there at Renaissance?
I think our ASB is very diverse school, and I think our ASB is very diverse as well. Going back to what you're saying about some of those the equity, they sound amazing. I wish we had those at Renaissance, because I think those would bring a lot of shine some new light on equity, obviously, and how to implement that, and those sound great. So I would love to maybe try to like implement some of those clubs at Renaissance maybe in the future.
Yeah, because
do you know how those came about, like how those were involved?
We have a process to apply for clubs at Millikan where a student can come up with their idea. They have to get it backed by a teacher, because a teacher has to, I think, be like the supervisor for a club. And so you have a lot of freedom. You can apply for whatever club you want. And I like that you recognize, that's important to be able to come up with your own club, and that you definitely recognize that, equity and like leadership being diverse and representative is important. So yeah, just tell me a little bit more about, especially through your experience, how you've seen, like why that diversity in the leadership is important to you, and especially like drawing from your ASB experiences, why is it important to see yourself being represented in your student leaders?
I mean, like I mentioned earlier, I think just being able to have the diversity of other cultures and nationalities and all that. We can learn from those people and learn from their experiences and try to like mold our experiences to cater theirs a little bit more, right? Like be able to accept their differences, right? And and acknowledge that and try to and just be with peace at that in a way. I'm not sure if that was the right word in there. But it just I think that in general.
Definitely. I agree. I totally agree what you're saying is like mold yourself to fit, that understanding. And
exactly.
Like seeing that just like instills it at you, certainly at a young age, especially like in a high school setting. I feel like that's important. Exactly what you said, like adding on to that. It also seeing yourself represented as a leader, it just makes the school more, democratic. And, like if you see someone who knows your wants and your needs, they're going to extend that to the whole school. And so you're going to get more of an accurate representation. And then even seeing yourself in a leadership position, seeing someone like you can help you to like be in touch with your side of leadership and
definitely.
Like let you visualize later in life, oh, I can be a leader. I can step into these, powerful roles, and that's right for me to do. And so it definitely helps to extend like that reach and into the future, especially for, the next generation of people working. And I think that that'll make significant changes.
For sure. Yeah, I think it's good to, if you're in high school, obviously, in middle school, it's good to try to get involved in student leadership at a young age, so that to try to change the world, right? Like I hear that a lot. Like you join student leadership to change the world, or if you have a passion for that, and social justice and all that is great things, and but just being able to get involved in leadership early on and carry your skills and build those leadership skills are really important for later on in life, I believe.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. So, especially since you have that experience being in ASB, can you tell me a little bit more about how, like, what things have you done in ASB that have expanded your knowledge of like what being a leader means to you, and like how have you seen other people use their leadership like for equity at Renaissance, and like how can you use your leadership to like affect the whole campus? Like what necessarily have you been doing in ASB that you see as impactful?
I think so. I mean, obviously, school spirit is very important. We don't have. I mean, we have school spirit, obviously, but I think I would love to build that school spirit. As obviously the other schools have really gung ho, which I love, and that's really amazing for them. And I think we at Renaissance just need to maybe build that up a little bit more. So I mean, obviously, school spirit and fundraisers and events, we obviously do those as well. But so for me, building my leadership skills, we've done some like trainings and stuff. And actually, when I was in 8th grade, going before high school, I was in ASB at Rogers Middle School. And we went to Disneyland for a leadership academy. So we went to this conference and learned about leadership and how to implement that in our daily lives, obviously. And that was really impactful. And I think that really helped me in high school, just have that knowledge of being a leader and taking that on to later things.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Like especially coming from a standpoint, you as an individual have had that experience like since 8th grade. Yeah. That's amazing. And so tying that back into like equity, you clearly, like having multiple years of ASB experience, you've found your voice and you've found comfort in expressing that. And so someone who maybe has joined ASB for the first time is feeling intimidated, or they're like, oh my goodness,
Yeah, exactly.
What do I do? Like, I want to tell people like how I feel, but you don't know how to. And so especially having like a diverse range of kids, especially from a young age, like grow, and ASB being a great example of how to do that. Like how you said, like you went to that conference for leadership. So having like this diverse, like sample size of kids who are finding their passion and finding comfort in being in that leadership position and like being able to express their voice is going to transform how they can be leaders later. And then now you're going to see all these powerful individuals from diverse backgrounds
Yeah.
being amazing leaders. And so you're not, picking and choosing certain races, certain genders, certain groups. And so now you have like this amazing range of former kids, who can
exactly.
express that. And I definitely see that, in your experience. That's amazing. And that's definitely, a reason where equity is important to give all these kids access to ASB.
Yep.
And because now everyone at that school, can see themselves represented in this diverse, like portion of kids at ASB, and then making decisions for the school. And then especially, restating what I said earlier, but bringing that into a career level, because even, obviously that will give the kids from ASB all this comfortability in, when you go into your next job, you won't be silenced, if you're a little nervous. But also seeing, as someone who isn't in ASB, like seeing people like you and leaders in ASB that like represent me and represent my needs, and knowing that that's the same for other people, it makes me less hesitant to, speak my truth and say what I need to say. And so like advocate for other people. And it's just setting like this chain of good examples and empowerment. And so I think that's super important, especially I'm glad that I can see that from your ASB experience.
Definitely. Yeah. It is truly amazing, like how just like leadership can really just impact, like, I mean, it can impact, obviously you yourself and other people, like, I mean, later in life, right? Like, I mean, I feel like hopefully I'll find later in life that, I can use my leadership skills from, middle school and high school to benefit, other people and help them feel included and, go back to, and, feel seen.
Definitely. And your story is like a testament to why everyone should have these opportunities, because it's worked wonders for you, and it definitely will for other people.
Yeah,
so,
indeed.
Moving on to the fourth question I'd like to ask you. So as interns at Marketing and Media Services, we both found out about this opportunity through our school, but we found out about it in different ways. And so, explain how you found out about it specifically. And then also, Ty, I want to know, what do you think is the importance of marketing opportunities like these, like internships, to kids and to all students?
So this internship, I found out through Renaissance, obviously, my stage tech teacher, Mr. Vera. Shout out to Mr. Vera. So I found out through her, and then I went home and looked on the website, and they have all these opportunities, they have all these jobs that LBUSD is offering, and I found this one, and she sent me a link of this internship, and I went to the website and looked at it and seemed like it was interesting, and so I applied for it, and I've really, really learned a lot, and I'm really glad I signed up for it.
Yeah.
How did you find out about it?
So I found out about it on our Canvas homepage.
Okay.
We had an ad at the top that was a universal list of all internships. So I clicked on it, not knowing there would be one specific to my interests.
Yeah.
And, you scroll down, you see all these biomedical ones and, engineering. And so then seeing one that applies to you is really great. But it was nice to know that was a universal thing, because it was on top of all the juniors' Canvas pages. And, I don't know specifically for the other interns, but it's nice to note that we all come from different high schools. And so clearly this was put out to a lot of kids, which is great, because
that's equity in itself, right? Because everyone is what would be able to have the same experience we are having, Yeah,
and so I think definitely the importance of marketing these opportunities to all kids, and we all coming from different high schools, we have different experiences, and know that we're partial to our own high school, like our high school kids, we should get all these experiences, but everyone should. And so it's super important to market these opportunities, because just from what we've done in a couple of weeks, I have furthered my knowledge in even like the specific sector of like film and media so much. And so it contributes even now, like practicing equity in marketing these opportunities for work-based learning extends that equity to college, because for kids who, let's say, didn't have an amazing teacher like yours to tell you about this, they would have missed out on this whole opportunity. And so that leads to like them missing out on opportunities for scholarships and things like that. And, getting that career experience, because it can be hard, applying to, let's say, a job for the first time and they ask for your experience and you have none. But how can you get experience without getting that first job? And so like marketing these internships, especially to students who have these busy schedules and are like, oh my gosh, I can't have time for a job that, only doesn't help me further my career goals, this is a great experience. And even more, why it's important to just like market this to everyone, especially how noting that our district internships are paid. That is so important because especially the kids, who needed this opportunity to expand their resume to apply to college, but that money can be put toward college, which just creates like this equitable environment that is so important to have. And
Definitely.
it just, boosts everyone up. And so, yeah, like specifically for you, it's great that, you had this one teacher, but why, would it be important for you to hear about these opportunities and for other students at your campus to hear about these like through other ways and for it to be marketed universally?
So, I mean, I mentioned earlier in the podcast that, so my school is an art school, obviously, and so kids are artists, obviously, of every single type. And we will be having one of the pathways, we'll be having a film pathway. So I think this internship and others probably around that would directly impact those students potentially. So I think just being able to have an internship like this and being able to pay, which is really amazing, can hopefully those students can take this internship and learn a lot and expand their knowledge from what they learned in high school to this internship outside of high school.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And especially, coming from your school, it's a unique standpoint where there are no sports.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that takes away like a big chunk. And it's amazing that your school is so specialized in arts. If some kid, already knows their passion at a young age, that is a great way for them to like shoot right into that career path. And that gives them a great opportunity. But also on the same standpoint, someone can be amazing at art and also have a passion for sports.
Yeah.
And so that specifically for Renaissance is so important to market like these opportunities to them, to everyone, because those kids don't have the opportunities for sports scholarships.
Exactly,
Coming like at Millikan, someone on the soccer team can get like this grant for playing soccer and that goes toward their college, but they are also being made aware of internships like these. Getting that would just super boost them, give them all this college readiness and all this money. And so especially like at Renaissance and for other schools that are left out of certain like sectors, like sports or have less arts or, things like that. Like marketing these internships is so important because, you can't just be left out. And it's so important, especially like it helps with, networking, like another thing to add to your resume, just works in your favor so much, but it's specifically for Renaissance kids because, this is their foundation. This is their life, essentially. And especially it just makes jobs in universities so much more attainable. And so I can definitely appreciate that.
Yeah. So another thing I want to add. So you mentioned like resumes, like, and I mean resume. It's really important to also any job in general, not just school, but outside of school. It's good to get a resume, like for any job, right? Working in an office cubicle, right? Or anything. Right? It's just good to have to if you have experiences and able to get experiences during high school and before that, it's great to like record those and take pictures and just make it's good to get a resume so you are prepared for the future and applying for jobs, right? Because jobs look at resumes and they want to see what you've done and where you go to school and all that. And just it's really important just to have that just so you're prepared for the future.
Yeah.
I've had a resume since middle school and it's over 2 pages. So I, of all the stage crew things I've done, and I'm obviously adding this to that resume as well because, it applies to stage crew in some form and way.
I 100% agree, and especially that work-based learning experience that you're going to get now.
Yeah.
I'm certain that all the other things on your resume look great, but, for anyone getting work-based learning, it can really set you apart because, maybe you struggle more with reading and writing and academic stuff, but then getting that hands-on experience and having that available to everyone, even those people who do struggle with academics, people might not say, oh, they deserve an internship, but they totally do. And so getting this opportunity will teach you, I know how to apply my knowledge. I work great hands-on. I work this is for me, and you find your path and you find what's good for you. And so that just, speaking from both our experiences and how much this has impacted us, we know that it's so incredibly important to market these opportunities to all students and give everyone a chance to just jumpstart their careers by getting hands-on experience.
Yeah, hands-on experience is really, I mean, in my stage crew, hands-on is really important in any field, but especially in stage crew. And that's how I learn best, because it's touching equipment and all that, and doing it live, because theater is live, right? And but it just hands-on is really important, just to learn and get as much knowledge as you possibly can for your future.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Yeah. And I think this wraps up our student takeover podcast. Thank you so much, Shelby.
It did. Thank you, Ethan. It's a great conversation.
Yeah.